Thank you so very much for tuning in to Armor of God again. And as always, I hope you'll be learning a lot from this one too. In fact, I've put together 11 clips here in this compilation, each clip addressing different subject. So let's start with the first one on the list, a clip of Father Reehil talking about music, heavy metal bands, Taylor Swift, Katy Perry, and the consecration of albums to the devil.
Music goes straight to the heart. And we all know this because we can just hear a song and immediately it affects emotion in us. And that's what I mean by goes to. So good music can go right to the heart in a good way that can draw you deeper in love with God. And demonic music can affect you in a negative way that can lead you away from God. On top of that, many of these, back in the day, the heavy metal bands, the rock bands of America back in the 80s and 70s, many of them would consecrate their albums to the devil. And they would have a black mass before they released the album to send demons to attach to everybody who buys the album, so they would further advance their music. And I know a priest. He's not a friend of mine, but we've spoken before. And before he was a priest, he was a real estate agent in Los Angeles and made many millions of dollars. Drove a Ferrari, and he went to several of these black masses when he was a real estate agent because he was invited because of his wealth. So he saw it firsthand that they do these things with their music. These days, that was when it was hidden. These days, they're not hiding it. All these, even Taylor Swift, she's really heavily into witchcraft and occult. At least she's giving us that impression by her concert tours and her video. Trying to send another message, it's failing because all she's projecting is witchcraft and occult and sorcery. So what happened? I don't know. I think the power and the money came, and you get deeper in debt to the devil, so to speak, and you start doing his bidding. Because this isn't a one-time thing. This has happened with so many of these. Katy Perry you started singing in church. Many of them are. And they're not trying to hide it because they're producing videos that keep putting the cult symbols out to the public. They're not hiding it. Whenever we are promoting or engaging or paying to watch other people sin, as we do with the movies, sin is an open door because, as any exorcist will tell you, it only takes one mortal sin to become possessed. Highly unlikely. It doesn't happen very often, but that's all it takes. The devil only needs one mortal sin. And then a lot of times the themes of this music from these artists is also very risque, very immodest, very sexual, and they're promoting all the capital sins. So you're a 15-year-old boy or girl, and this is like exciting to you, and then you say, I want to be like them, and then you start thinking, well, maybe I should be behaving like this if this is what makes you cool. And they don't know what they're doing. They have no idea this is inviting demons into their life. And then by the time they're 18, they're severely depressed and have suicidal thoughts, and they don't know why. And the parents are so upset, and nobody's looking at the obvious. What are they feeding on? When I say feeding, I mean, what are they putting in their ears and through their eyes?
In the previous video, I've covered a subject that made a few people uncomfortable in the comments, and understandably so, because I had to include some images that, well, inappropriate. So although in the following clip we're going to listen to Father Carlos Martins talking about the same subject, I'm not going to include any of the images I've shared in the previous video. But it's still very shocking and a very dark subject. Nonetheless, it's ultimately very important because there are so many innocent lives claimed and lost by them. Please listen to this.
Yeah, so we're talking about in the realm of organized Satanism. We're talking about cults, but cults, this is not a cult like your Jim Jones cult. These are ancient cults. These are cults, by the word ancient, I mean very, very old, many generations. They're not interested in new membership, right? They don't want you to join them. They're not out to convert you to evangelize you into their enterprise. They don't give a rat's rump about you. They raise their own members. They breed them. So they have a collection of breeders. They bring children into the world, the births of whom are unregistered. So no one knows that they live. So these are not people living next door, by and large. They're living out in the country. They're living in a realm by which the neighbors are not going to see the children. Or if they see them, they're not going to know that they're unregistered. Or if they do know, they believe they're homeschooled or something like that. These are children that a cult breeds to perpetuate the cult, but also to provide bodies, to provide victims for its sacrifices. The cults use them, and I've encountered numerous examples of this. I've had 3 possession cases where someone has broken free, and this was a person who was used in the production of child pornography. So there were videos filmed, recorded, and sold, and this is one of the ways in which the cult makes money. Now, the interesting thing about this is this. We hear about periodically the authorities discovering a cache of child pornography. We hear about them arresting a ring of the consumers of that type of pornography, and we'll hear about 87 people were arrested, 14 were lawyers, 23 were teachers, et cetera, et cetera. They release all kinds of statistics, informations, and breakdown numbers with regard to it. But you have never heard them say that they discovered the child actors. Because in terms of the cults, by the time that porn is released, those actors don't exist any longer. Right? They're gone. They're gone. And so this is the visceral nature of that. They've got lots invested in this. And the ones that I met, all 3 of them, were escapees. So they managed to escape. They managed to set themselves free by the skin of their teeth, because every resource that cult could muster up was exerted in trying to capture back these individuals. And all 3 of them were living under assumed identities. They were their identities, and here's the thing. They had to be given assumed identities regardless, because none of them had a birth certificate. Right? None of them had a registered ID with the government. So some of them were called by multiple names, and they didn't understand themselves. Like, I mean, your name is Joe, my name is Carlos. Some of them never had that experience of being known by one name. There was a multitude given to them. And so these folks have had just a horrific experience of life, and this is part of the reality that is there. So I felt, we did have episodes in the 80s where there was this kind of phobia that cults were taking over children's camps and so forth, and apparently much of that was proven to be false. I'm not speaking to that at all. I don't know anything about what happened in the 1980s per se. I'm not an expert in that. I don't have any experience in that. And I don't have a verdict or a judgment by which I feel like I have anything to offer about what was discovered by the authorities or lack thereof. But I will tell you that I do know cults exist. I've been witness to it. And I've had my own retaliation against me by some of them. And it is incredible, the damage that has been done to the individuals that have escaped. I mean, they will never live normal lives like what you and I consider normal, because their upbringing was so horrific.
For the following clip, I would like to include this one of Father Joseph Iannuzzi answering a question. Had Adam and Eve not sinned, would Christ have come without a human person?
There were already souls going to hell before original sin, angelic souls, right? So we all have to pass a test individually, okay? Without the test, there is no glory. Without passing a test, there is no merit. So there has to be that possibility of salvation and damnation in all of us individually, even without original sin. So yes, and Jesus would have come even if Adam and Eve did not sin. He would have come triumphant, reigning in the flesh. Now the question is up to debate. Would Christ have come through Mary, or would he have come without a human being? And my answer to that is he would not have come without a human being. That's my theological perspective. He would have still come through Mary. There are church fathers who speak of Mary having been chosen from eternity, even before she was conceived, to be the chosen one through whom Christ would come in and through creation. So If Adam and Eve had not sinned, the church does not teach this, remember. This is called speculative theology, not fundamental theology, not dogmatic, meaning it's open to debate. Would Christ have come without a human mediator, human person? I don't think so. Why? Because where did he get his humanity from? He has to get his humanity from a human being, right? He's God. He has no human nature yet. So how does he get this human nature? From a human being, like he did through Mary. So my understanding is that even though he describes his return in the flesh as being escorted by angels and saints, I think that is the fruit of him having come to earth through the Virgin Mary. So I believe that if Adam and Eve had not sinned, he still would have come to earth through the Virgin Mary when Adam and Eve had filled the earth, because that was their duty, to fill the earth and be its steward. But that's just my theological opinion. Again, it's not church teaching.
And there's another question that Father Iannuzzi addressed before. The question is, if somebody tramples on the Eucharist deliberately, does Christ experience pain?
I often thought of this when I was a seminarian and didn't know the answer until I was later educated at the universities in Rome. And the question was that I never had an answer to. If somebody tramples the Eucharist, takes it out of the tabernacle and tramples on it deliberately, does Christ experience physical pain? Or if I bite the Eucharist when I receive him on Sunday, does he experience my biting as pain, like me biting someone's arm? I often question this as a seminarian and never had the answer. I said, why would Christ want us to cause him pain by eating him? And the answer is he does not experience any pain when we consume him in the Eucharist and when you step on him, even sacrilegiously. He does not experience any pain. It's sorrow if the intention is to hurt him. If the intention is to masticate him, to assimilate yourself with him, he experiences love and joy. That's why he chose the manner by which to assimilate us as consumption. He consumed himself and then asked us to do the same, to consume him. So the answer to your question, there is no physical pain in heaven, but there is sorrow experienced by the Father, by the Son, by the Holy Spirit. But only the Son has a body, but that body is immune from all pain. And this is known in theology. It's a characteristic among all the blessed on account of the beatific vision, known as impassibility. You cannot suffer any pain in heaven, but you can experience sorrow. And this is why we find in the book of Revelation, chapter 6, I think it's verse 9, the saints who had been beheaded during the reign of the false prophet and the beast, who had been martyred, wearing white robes, complaining to God, when will you vindicate our blood that was shed? That is sorrow. Some people think heaven is all smiles, everybody hugging each other, singing kumbaya. There's also sorrow, weeping in heaven.
I very much like this reflection by Father Reehil on penances and sufferings, and that we have to build up our spiritual muscles. Listen to this.
England or America, some of these first world countries, our lives are very, very comfortable. Like to the point where if you're making $40,000 a year and you have living in a house that has hot running water that's drinkable, you're probably in the top 1% of the global population, literally. And so you have to, because 2 billion people don't live in a home, they live outside and they have to forage for food. So when you think about that, when Jesus gives these admonitions about the wealthy and the rich, we often think of it like, well, he's talking about Bill Gates, he's talking about Elon Musk, he's talking about Donald Trump. No, he's talking about you, because you're in the top 1%. And we often think, me, I'm poor. I go, no, you're not. You drive a car that's fairly new. You have this heat come out of your car. You have air conditioning. You have heated seats. But we compare ourselves to the billionaires and we think, oh, we're not rich. Well, you're rich compared to the people living in a tent in the woods. So I say, because the culture is so soft and so has such an aversion to any kind of suffering, that self-imposed penances are important, because otherwise the body starts telling the soul what to do. And that's when people get into trouble, when they have no boundaries. They have no way to say no to temptation, and they give in to everything. And they go, why is this happening? And I go, tell me about your life. And then they explain their lifestyle. And I go, your life is too easy. That's why you're having trouble saying no to temptation. start putting some penances in your life. And then the soul is telling the body, no, we're doing this today. We're not doing that. And then the body gets used to taking commands from the soul. So and I'm not talking about giving up something bad. I'm like, just to fast on bread and water 2 days a week is a penance. But it tells the body, you're going to go without today and you're going to be okay. You're not going to die. And then when something that's evil comes along that the body craves, something maybe lust of, whatever, then the soul has enough strength to say, no, we're not doing that. And then you overcome the temptation. And this has always been the way it is. You have to build up your spiritual muscles so when the fight comes, you can do the battle and win.
And as for the following clip, I very much like to share this one of Father Martin's where he talked about divine seeing or divine looking.
Hanging a sacred image, a crucifix, on your wall is itself a prayer. And that prayer is a symbolic, constant uttering of your devotion to the Word. And that in and of itself is exorcistic. It's caustic to the demons to have that. But even it goes beyond that. The blessings of sacred images are such that when one is undergoing a great temptation, to look at a sacred image is exorcistic. It is already invoking one's need, plus the look is already invoking the saint in question. And, when you have in your oratory, in your place of prayer, these sacred images, they lift the spirit and the mind up to God. And I'll tell you, merely looking at a sacred image is itself a prayer. The fact that it's hanging there is a prayer. To look at it is itself an additional prayer. And we call it in the church visio divina, divine looking.
By the way, in recent videos, I've been sharing with you clips of people sharing some of their ghost stories, and many of you like that approach. So here's another one, and I very much like to hear your thoughts on it. Please listen to this.
So I own a pest control company in Northeast Tennessee, and I was servicing a church up here in Northeast Tennessee. And this church was built probably in the late 1800s. And so all original as far as the construction. And so I had serviced the place for years actually, and never saw anything or felt anything. But one day I went to the service and I went down to the basement, was going down the basement. And I walked down the steps to go to the basement. And at the bottom of the stairs, straight across from the stairwell, was an old coal room that they used to put coal in the furnace of the church. And then to the right of that was the old archives where they kept all the old archived information for the church, anyway, all the historical stuff. And so the lights were off downstairs. I was coming down the steps to go to the basement to do the service. I got midway down the steps, and out of the coal room or the archive room came walking an apparition. Was about 6 feet tall. It was like surrounded in a mist, but inside the mist you could see movement, like it was wearing like a robe, and you could see the flow of the robe as it walked toward the steps. And it scared me so bad that it took my breath, and I had to grab a hold of the railing to keep from, passing out, because it was so crazy. But it walked very slowly toward the steps, like it was going to come up the steps, and then it turned to the right and walked down the hallway. And there's a hallway that runs the length of the church back and forth. And so I realized I had to go down there after standing there for a minute, like in shock. And so I went down to the bottom of the steps and took my flashlight, and I looked left and right, and so I went ahead and did the service, and just was freaked out the whole time I did the service. Well, the only person in the church when I would do the service was the receptionist, and she was always just there by herself, and I wasn't going to say anything because I didn't want to freak her out, but it was so amazing I didn't want to not ask her if she'd ever seen anything. And so I got back up there and asked her, I said, "Have you ever seen anything weird in here?" And it's in the church. And she was like, "Well, what do you mean?" And I told her what I saw. And she's like, oh my gosh. And she's like, no, I've never seen anything like that. She said, but I was here in my office one day, and she said all of a sudden down the hall, which was the old sanctuary, beautiful sanctuary. She said for about 8 to 10 seconds, she heard someone start preaching very loudly, like fire and brimstone preaching, and it just faded off to nothing. And so, about that time, the pastor of the church came in, and she's like, tell him what you saw. And I was like, oh God, he's going to think I'm a nut. But I told him, I was just saying, hey, this is what I seen, I don't know what's up. And he said, just because this is a church don't mean that there can't be spirits and can't be, he said, I believe it. And he said, if we could see the spirit realm, we'd probably die of fright because of what's going on around us in the spirit world. And he said, you just happened to catch a glimpse of something. And I didn't feel like, it wasn't like an evil feeling. It wasn't like, but it was just more of a shock than anything else. But I'll tell you this part here real quick before I finish up. But I had to go back the next month and service the place. So for the next like 3 or 4 months, I was like anxious about seeing it again as I was going down the steps, but I never did. About a year went by, and by then I had basically totally forgot about, well, not forgot about it, but just wasn't thinking about it. And so I went down the steps and I turned left to go down the hallway. I never really turned on the lights because I just had my flashlight. And at the end of that hallway, where that thing had walked previously, were 2 double doors, and there was panes of glass in each door, big panes of glass where you could see through those doors, which it was dark, so I couldn't see anything on the other side of it. But all of a sudden, on the left side pane glass, a ball of light came up about the size of a softball, and it was the same illuminated, misty color as that apparition. And then all of a sudden, it got bigger and started to manifest into that apparition. And I turned around. I was like, no, not today. And I went back upstairs, and I told the receptionist, I was like, look, that thing just appeared again down there. I said, I just ain't in the mood. I'm going to have to just chill on. I was like shaking up. I said, I'm going to have to come back and do the basement later. I can't do it today. And so she said, that's fine. And so about a week later, I went back and did the basement and didn't see anything. Ended up servicing the church for probably 3 or 4 more years.
And I want to share another clip of Father Joseph Iannuzzi with you. This time I'd like to share this one where he quoted what God the Father and the Son told St. Catherine, as written in the Dialogue of Divine Providence. And it's on loving ourselves.
How we have to first love ourselves before we can love anyone else. This comes right out of the pages of St. Catherine of Siena's Dialogue of Divine Providence, where she received revelations from mostly God the Father, as well as from the Son. And in these revelations written by someone else, she received them after communion, God the Father tells her that your first neighbor is yourself. If you don't love yourself, you can't love your neighbor. Now, some people, when they hear that, I must love myself, think, no, that's kind of egotistic, self-inflated, self-absorbed. It's not. The love God's speaking about here is not the love the world talks about. It's the kind of love that places you in such a high state of alert and of attentiveness that you don't want to offend the one whom gave you your body and your soul. So when you love your body and your soul, you're loving yourself, which is the temple of the Holy Spirit, which will resurrect on the last day, and which contains, the seed of eternal life through the resurrection and the divine will that caused that resurrection. And when we love ourselves, this disposes us to love others who are imperfect like us. So what I'm hearing from them is perfectly consistent with the writings of St. Catherine of Siena, the scriptures, and it's beautiful. Thank you.
The following 3 clips will be of Father Reehil, and all 3 are relatively short. So let's start with this one, the first of the 3. Please listen to this.
I had an attorney, so we would assume this has to be an intelligent woman, right? She has a law degree. She saw things moving on her bedroom bureau, like little antique figurines that were moving around. And she says she's an atheist. Well, she was at the time. And she thought, well, what's making that happen? Well, if there's somebody in the room, hold my hand. Okay, permission number 1. And something grabbed her hand. Well, who are you? It's not talking to her. So eventually she says, well, I'm going to sleep now. If you want to come into bed with me, you can. And she invited into bed. By night 3, she's being raped. But that was a really very stupid thing to do, to be quite honest. Should have known better. But because she had no faith, she had no understanding of the demonic. She had never read the Bible. She doesn't know about the stories of Jesus casting these things out. I would think, given her age, she was in her 40s, she should have at some point known or heard somewhere, watched the movie The Exorcist or whatever, where she could at least say, maybe this is real.
And this one is still a good thing to remember. We started this video with a heavy subject, for example, on what the satanic cult did to the children. So I would like to end this compilation with this one instead.
If Jesus and Mary were sitting with you, would you be doing this activity? So would you put that movie on? Would you buy that board game? Would you go to that store? And imagine going into the Harry Potter store with Our Lady. Like, what would she be thinking? No, you'd be like, I don't think she likes this. So, and you would know right away, if you have an active working conscience, you would know right away that, no, that's not going to work. And I've said to my own parish, imagine if Jesus appeared to you in the flesh as a man, and he said, I'm going to stay with you for 24 hours and go through your day and see how your day is going. So you wake up in the morning, and you look over, there he is, smiling at you. Hello, good morning. It's good to be with you today. How are you doing? Oh, I'm good. And you're going to hit the snooze button? No, because he's sitting right there. You're going to get up and go, okay, let's start the day. And you're driving to work, and somebody cuts you off, and he's sitting right next to you. And instead of yelling at that person, you're going to go, oh, wow, that person could be having a bad day. We should probably say a prayer for them. And, the whole day is like this. And then you get home at the end of the day and you go to hit Netflix and you think, oh, but Jesus is here. Maybe we'll watch The Chosen tonight. Your day will be different. He's right there with you, whether you see him or not. Beautiful. But the more we can be aware of his presence, the more we will change.
And so that is all for this time. For all of you who are still here, listening and watching, I just want to say thank you so much for your time. I hope all of you have learned a lot from compilations like this one. And remember, if ever you have any feedback or suggestion, please let us know in the comments below. Anyway, if you like what we do and you'd like to support us, I left a link to our PayPal donation in the description box below, and from the bottom of my heart, thank you so much for your continuous support, contributions, and prayers. And until the next one, thanks again for watching, and may God bless you.
I had one of my parishioners was away on vacation, and they came back and said, you wouldn't believe what we saw. This priest seemed angry at the Eucharist. He was angry as he was saying the Mass. They could just, they could sense this great anger he had. And when after he elevated the host, tossed the Eucharist into the paten, tossed it. Though it shocked the kids and the family. They just were like horrified. If you're doing that, it'd be better you take a leave of absence and figure out what's wrong.